My parents did not invite me to Christmas dinner because they missed me. They invited me because my sister had been arrested again, and this time the mess was expensive enough that they had run out of other people to bleed. I knew something was wrong 3 days before Christmas, when my mother called twice before noon and left a voicemail that sounded too cheerful to be real. "Nathan, honey, your father and I really want everyone together this year. No tension, no old issues, just family. Please don't make this difficult." When my mother said, "no tension," what she meant was that she had already built a stage and wanted me to show up on cue. I was 33, old enough to know the tone of her traps. Diane Mercer had 2 voices she used on me. One was brittle disappointment, sharp enough to make childhood guilt flare up on reflex. The other was this soft holiday lacquer she painted over ugly things right before demanding something unreasonable. She sounded like that now, all cinnamon and poison. I let the voicemail finish, locked my phone, and looked out the office window at the gray December parking lot below. People were leaving early with bakery boxes, cheap gifts, and that end-of-year exhaustion that makes every city look temporary. I still had reports open on one monitor and a spreadsheet of compliance exceptions on the other, but I wasn't seeing any of it. My mind had snagged on one word: family. In the Mercer household, family had never meant safety. It meant obligation. It meant whatever my parents wanted to take from the more responsible child while explaining why the less responsible one needed even more. An hour later, my father called. That alone told me everything. Paul Mercer did not call unless there was money, paperwork, or reputation involved. Emotion was my mother's department. Logistics belonged to him. "You coming on Christmas Eve?" he asked, with the same tone he might use to confirm a tire appointment. "I haven't decided." A pause. "Your mother is trying to make this nice. Then tell her not to call it nice before I know what it is." Another pause, longer this time. "Claire is going through something serious." There it was. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of serious? "She needs support." That's not an answer. It's not a phone conversation. Then he hung up, because my father believed that refusing detail counted as authority. I sat there with the deadline in my hand and thought about my sister. Claire Mercer had been going through something for most of her adult life. That phrase covered a wide range of disasters depending on the year. In college, it had meant a car she had wrapped around a mailbox after leaving a party. At 25, it had meant a credit card balance my parents quietly paid after she insisted identity theft was involved, right up until the receipts proved she had spent $4,000 on skincare, concert tickets, and furniture for an apartment she abandoned 6 months later. At 28, it had meant a job in real estate where money went missing from a client escrow account, and somehow the whole family was expected to treat her termination as an act of persecution by jealous coworkers. Claire was never a villain in the cartoon sense. She could be funny, charming, even generous when she wanted to be. Strangers loved her for about 6 months. Then the excuses started, then the shortcuts, then the tearful late-night phone calls where consequences were recast as cruelty. My parents, especially my mother, were built to receive that kind of performance. They did not just believe her. They needed to believe her, because otherwise they would have to admit what decades of rescue had created. I knew one more thing before I even asked around. If both of my parents were suddenly committed to healing the family, at Christmas, the bill was coming toward me. That night, I called my cousin Elena. If there was smoke in the family, Elena usually knew which room it started in. She had the rare gift of being invited everywhere and trusted by no one, which made her an excellent source of accidental truth. "You didn't hear this from me," she said after I asked whether Claire was in trouble. "There was some kind of arrest 2 weeks ago." My stomach tightened. For what? DUI, I think. Maybe more than DUI. Somebody got hurt, Nate. I stood up from my desk and shut the office door. How hurt? I don't know exactly. I heard there was another car. Not fatal, but not nothing either. And apparently Claire mouthed off to the officers, so that didn't help. I closed my eyes. "Your mom has been calling around," Elena added. "She keeps saying the family needs to rally and that people who love Claire won't abandon her when she's vulnerable. Which means she needs money." That was my guess. Did she mention me? A tiny silence. "She said Grandma Evelyn left you in a very fortunate position, and that maybe this is one of those moments where money has a moral purpose." I laughed once, no humor in it. Of course she did. After we hung up, I sat in the dark office for another 10 minutes, listening to the heating vents click and throb overhead. My grandmother Evelyn had died 4 years earlier. She was my father's mother, and for most of my childhood, she was the only adult in the family who saw what was happening clearly enough to name it. She never said golden child or scapegoat, because that generation did not use those words. But she had looked at Claire and me one summer after a screaming fight over a broken necklace and told me, very quietly, "Your sister breaks things, and they ask who handed them to her." Grandma Evelyn had money in the plain, old, unflashy way some widows do after decades of caution and watching every cent. She had sold a house at the right time, lived below her means, and never confused status with security. When she died, she left smaller equal gifts to various grandchildren and charities. The main protected trust, though, she left only to me. Not because I was her favorite, because she knew exactly what the rest of them would do if she left me exposed. The trust was enough to matter, not enough to become one of those absurd internet fantasy numbers. A little over $110,000 remained in it after taxes, fees, and an initial distribution used for my condo down payment. It was managed conservatively. I could access it for specific purposes or request distributions through the advisor, but it was not a checking account, and it was absolutely not family money. Grandma Evelyn had made that brutally clear in a letter I still kept in a folder at home. "This is for your stability, Nathan. Do not let anyone tell you that being responsible means becoming a resource for irresponsible people." The first time I read those words after the funeral, I cried in my car like I was 16 again. Not because of the money, because someone had finally put in writing what I had lived with my whole life. I already knew my parents resented the structure. My mother used to refer to the trust as that wall your grandmother built, and my father once tried to ask me what counted as an allowable emergency under the documents in a tone so casual it practically glowed. Now Claire had been arrested, there were injuries involved, and Christmas dinner had suddenly become mandatory. I should have stayed home. Any sane adult with enough history would have stayed home, ordered takeout, watched a terrible movie, and sent one neutral text at noon. But family conditioning is a deep-rooted disease. Even when you can diagnose it, sometimes you still catch yourself reaching toward it like it might one day turn into what it always claimed to be. I told myself I was going for information. I told myself I would stay an hour, keep my coat near the door, and leave the second money came up. I drove to my parents' house on Christmas Eve in freezing rain that glazed the roads and turned every set of headlights into a blur. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had when I was 12 and still believed that if I got perfect grades and never caused trouble, the atmosphere in that house might soften around me. Same brick colonials, same inflatable reindeer, same wreaths tied to doors with red velvet ribbon, as if every family inside those homes was warm and straightforward and fundamentally sane. My mother opened the door before I knocked. There are women who age into softness. Diane Mercer aged into sharper architecture. Her cheekbones grew more pronounced, her smile more calculated, her holiday earrings more aggressive. She hugged me with one arm and kissed the air beside my face. "You came," she said. That was the first confirmation that this was a setup. No mother says you came like she was worried her son might not attend Christmas Eve dinner unless she knows exactly why he might avoid it. Inside, the house smelled like cloves, beef roast, and the expensive pine candle she lit whenever guests were coming. My Aunt Rebecca was in the living room, already half a glass of wine into her annual performance as family diplomat. Elena was on the couch looking like she regretted every life choice that had brought her there. My father stood by the dining room archway in a navy sweater, face unreadable. And Claire, my sister, sat by the tree in cream-colored pants and a fitted green top, so polished she could have been in an advertisement for second chances. She stood when she saw me and opened her arms like we were normal. "Nate." I gave her a brief hug because refusing would have caused a scene before dinner, and they were saving their scene for later. Up close I could see the strain beneath the makeup. Her eyes were puffy at the edges. Her expression had that overmanaged fragility people get when they've been crying strategically all day. "How are you?" she asked. "Depends what you mean." Her smile flickered, then reset. I'm glad you came." I looked at her for a second longer than was comfortable. "Yeah, I bet." Dinner itself was almost worse than an immediate confrontation. They delayed it. That was their style. Build normalcy first. Force everyone to perform warmth. Make the eventual demand harder to refuse because it would rupture the atmosphere they had manufactured and make me look like the one who spoiled Christmas. My mother kept conversation floating over harmless topics like new restaurants and Elena's work travel. My aunt complained about airline prices. My father carved the roast. Claire mostly stayed quiet, which was unusual enough to ring like an alarm bell. There was a folder next to my plate when we sat down. Dark blue cardstock, no label. I stared at it for half a second and then at my father. He did not look away. "What is that?" I asked. My mother put down her wine glass with exaggerated gentleness. "Nathan, before you react, I need you to understand that this is a very painful time for your sister." I did not touch the folder. "What is it?" Claire inhaled shakily, eyes brightening on command. "I made a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated. My Aunt Rebecca jumped in. "Let's not use loaded language on Christmas Eve." I laughed because at that point laughter was safer than saying what I was actually thinking. My father folded his hands. "Claire has been charged in connection with an accident." "In connection with?" "It was a DUI," Elena said flatly from the other end of the table, unable to tolerate theater. My mother shot her a look sharp enough to peel paint. Claire's face collapsed into wounded innocence. "I should never have driven." "I know that. I know. Her voice broke. I panicked. "You panicked before or after you hit someone?" I asked. Silence. My mother whispered, "Nathan, how hurt were they?" My father answered this time. "Broken wrist. Concussion. There may be some civil exposure in addition to the criminal case." There it was. Not just legal fees. Potential liability. "Open the folder," he said. I didn't move. "Nathan," my mother said, "please. Don't be cold." Cold. A family favorite. In the Mercer Dictionary, cold meant resistant to manipulation. I opened the folder. Inside was a printout from a law firm, a retainer agreement, preliminary cost estimates, and a typed page my father had clearly drafted summarizing why swift representation was essential. I read enough to understand the numbers. The attorney they wanted specialized in high-conflict DUI and injury cases and required a massive upfront retainer. Then I saw a handwritten figure in the margin. $85,000. For a second the room seemed to tilt. I looked up slowly. "You want $85,000. My mother corrected me immediately. "Claire needs $85,000. "No," I said. "You want me to give Claire $85,000. My father's jaw tightened. "Not give. Protect. If she doesn't get proper counsel, this could destroy the rest of her life." I almost asked what exactly they thought the crash had been doing to the other driver's life, but I knew better than to waste morality on people who only invoked it selectively. "You're asking me to drain the trust," I said. My mother leaned in. "Your grandmother would never have wanted you to sit on money while your sister's future is destroyed." That was such a naked lie that my vision briefly sharpened. She left it to me because she knew exactly how you people are. The temperature in the room dropped all at once. Aunt Rebecca gasped softly, like a church woman hearing profanity. My father's voice went flat. "Watch yourself." "No, you watch yourselves. You put legal paperwork next to my plate at Christmas dinner, and you're pretending I'm the one crossing a line." Claire started crying for real or close enough to fool most observers. I didn't want it like this. I turned to her. "Then when did you want it?" "Before or after Mom started shopping my trust around to the family, like it was communal property." "Nathan," my mother snapped, dropping the sugary tone at last. "Everything does not have to be a personal attack." I looked at each of them in turn, and what hit me hardest was not the greed. It was the assumption, the absolute, casual certainty that this was a reasonable use of my life. They had not invited me to discuss. They had invited me to comply. "You already told her I'd help," I said. No one answered. That was answer enough. My father reached for the folder and tapped the retainer page. "The window to retain this attorney is closing. We need to move quickly." I sat back and suddenly saw the entire machine. They had gathered witnesses. They had wrapped the ask in holiday decor. They had framed refusal as cruelty to an injured sister. They had probably spent days rehearsing how to present it so that the responsible child would feel trapped between his own instincts and the public shame of saying no at a family table. I had been sitting at variations of that table my whole life. At 13, when Claire stole cash from my backpack and my mother said I should have hidden it better because Claire was under stress. At 17, when my father took my used car away for a month because I refused to let Claire borrow it after she came home drunk twice in 1 week. At 22, when Claire missed rent, cried in the kitchen, and my mother asked why I had savings at all if not to help family in emergencies. Every time, the same formula. Claire detonated. The adults translated the explosion into need. Then they turned toward me, the nearest stable surface, and demanded absorption. I remembered one day in particular, a month after Grandma Evelyn's funeral, when my mother came to my apartment with a casserole and sat at my counter asking gentle questions about the trust advisor. Had I met him? Was he nice? Could funds be used for family medical needs in a crisis? Could I designate someone to help me manage it if I was overwhelmed? She had said all of it with the false concern of a nurse checking a pulse. When I told her the trust was private and professionally managed, her face changed for a fraction of a second into something hard and insulted. Now, at Christmas dinner, the insult had finally matured into demand. "I'm not paying this," I said. Claire made a sound like she'd been slapped. My aunt put down her fork. "Nathan, that's your sister." "Yes," I said, "and that was somebody else's family in the other car." My mother stared at me with open disbelief. "So you're going to punish her forever for one terrible decision?" "One." I laughed again, sharper this time. "Do we want to make a list?" "Nate, please," Claire whispered. "I know I've messed up, but I'm scared." For one dangerous second, part of me softened. Not enough to say yes, but enough to remember that fear is still fear, even inside a person who creates a lot of it for others. Then I looked at the folder, at the number in the margin, at my father's prepared summary like he was pitching an investment, and the softness died. "You are scared because consequences are finally expensive enough that Mom and Dad can't hide them," I said. My father pushed back from the table. "That is enough." "No, actually, it isn't." I heard my own voice getting steadier, colder. Claire totaled one car in college, maxed out cards she lied about, lost a job over missing money, and every single time the story was that life had been unfair to her. Every single time someone else was expected to catch her. Now she drives drunk, hurts somebody, and you bring me legal invoices at Christmas like I'm the family insurance policy. My mother's eyes filled. Not with sadness. With fury. "You always do this," she said. "You keep score. You hold yourself above everyone. You act like being responsible makes you morally superior." "No," I said. "You did that. You made responsibility into my assigned role because it was easier than parenting her." The room went still. Even Elena looked up. My father's face had gone the pale, compressed color it used to get right before he shouted when I was young. "You will not speak to your mother like that in this house." I stood. "Then stop using me in this house." Claire was openly sobbing now. "I can't go to jail, Nate." The sentence landed, because finally there was some honesty in the room. I looked at her. "That should have mattered before you got behind the wheel. You don't understand. My whole life will be over." There it was again. Claire's tragedy always arrived with the assumption that no one else's suffering was in frame. I picked up the folder and slid it across the table toward my father. "I'm not emptying that trust. I'm not funding a lawyer to erase consequences you bought yourself." My Aunt Rebecca stood halfway, outraged. "How can you live with yourself?" I turned to her. Surprisingly easily, compared to the people trying to spend money that isn't theirs. My mother's chair scraped back. "After everything this family has done for you." That line. Every abusive family has one sentence they polish for emergencies. Mine was this one. It translated loosely to "We invested in your obedience and are frustrated by the return." "What exactly did you do for me?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "Made me be the easy child? Let me earn good grades so you didn't have to worry about one of us? Treated anything stable in my life like a reserve account for Claire?" "You are cruel," she said. "Maybe," I answered, "but I'm not wrong." Then my father made the mistake that ended whatever was left. He said, "If Evelyn hadn't poisoned you against us, you'd understand what family duty looks like." I went very still. Grandma Evelyn had been dead for 4 years, and I had spent most of that time biting back every opinion I had about how my parents spoke of her. But something about hearing him say poisoned, in that house, with my trust laid open like a carcass on the table, snapped the last thread. She was the only one in this family who loved me without attaching a price tag. My mother sucked in a breath. My father stepped around the table. Get out. I held his gaze. Gladly. Claire stood too, blotting tears with a napkin. So that's it. You're just abandoning me. I picked up my coat. No. I'm declining to sponsor you. That line would have been funny anywhere else. In that dining room, it landed like a thrown plate. I walked out to a chorus of overlapping voices, my mother calling my name in outrage, my aunt saying I would regret this, Claire crying, my father ordering me not to contact them again until I learned some respect. The freezing rain had turned to sleet. My windshield was a crust of white pellets. I sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and let the adrenaline burn through me until my fingers stopped shaking. Then I drove home. I wish I could say that was the end. That Christmas dinner was the clean break, the cinematic final act where the villainous family revealed themselves and I walked into a better life scored by triumphant music. Real life is less elegant. The pressure campaign started before I reached my condo. 3 texts from my mother. You humiliated your sister. Your father is devastated. I hope you can live with what you did tonight. Then 1 from Claire. If I lose everything because of you, I hope it was worth it. Then 1 from a number I didn't recognize. The other aunt. Family remembers who shows up. I did not answer any of them. The next morning, I woke to 7 missed calls and a Facebook message from a man I had not seen since my cousin's wedding asking whether it was true I was refusing to help Claire out of spite over old sibling issues. That was when I understood they were already building their public version. I spent the first half of Christmas Day on my couch in sweatpants, drinking coffee gone cold and watching my phone light up like it was trying to escape. By noon, the narrative was clear. According to various relatives, Claire had made a terrible mistake, was emotionally shattered, and I had chosen a pile of protected money over compassion. The injured party in the other car had vanished entirely from the story. So had the history. So had the fact that this one mistake was just the latest in a line of expensive rescues. It would have been easy to answer emotionally, to start firing back paragraphs explaining years of manipulation and enabling. But somewhere between the 8th missed call and the 2nd accusation of heartlessness, something colder and more useful settled in. My parents had escalated from pressure to entitlement theater. That meant I needed to stop thinking like a son and start thinking like a risk analyst. I worked in compliance for a bank. I spent my days tracking patterns, documenting exposure, and identifying where emotional narratives tried to disguise structural problems. It was not glamorous work, but it had taught me something valuable. The moment people start inventing urgency around your assets, you stop talking and start documenting. So I did. I took screenshots of every text. I saved voicemails. I wrote a detailed account of the dinner while memory was fresh, including who said what and when the folder appeared. Then, the day after Christmas, I emailed my trust advisor and asked for a call. His name was Martin Hale, and he had the calm, dry efficiency of a man who had spent decades cleaning up after wealthy people and their relatives. I told him what had happened. Not the full family psychodrama, just the relevant facts. My sister had criminal and likely civil exposure. My parents had attempted to pressure me into making a large distribution, and I wanted to confirm what security protocols were in place and whether any inquiries had been made about the trust by anyone other than me. There was a pause on the line. Actually, Martin said, your mother contacted the office several months ago asking general questions about emergency distributions for close family. We did not disclose anything specific. My throat tightened. Did she identify herself as my mother? She did. And you told me nothing about that. It was framed as hypothetical, and we gave no information. In retrospect, given this context, I should have mentioned the outreach. That's on me. That one admission was enough to turn my anger into something crystalline. They had been probing. This Christmas ambush was not spontaneous grief and panic. It was the latest step in a campaign they had likely been building for months, maybe longer. They had looked at my grandmother's final act of protection and started searching for seams in it. Lock everything down, I said. We already maintain normal verification procedures. I want enhanced documentation on any contact. No verbal discussion of any kind with anyone but me. Written confirmation on any inquiry. Note the family situation in the file. Understood. Then I called an attorney. I did not sue anybody. I was not trying to create drama for sport. I wanted two things: a formal understanding of how to protect myself if my family escalated into fraud, and a clean written boundary that could not be twisted into holiday emotion. The attorney, a woman named Priya Shah, listened for 20 minutes and said, "You are not overreacting." That sentence did more for my nervous system than any amount of sympathy from friends could have. She advised me on a few practical steps. Monitor my credit. Freeze it if I was worried about opportunistic applications. Put all financial institutions on heightened alert. Send a concise cease and desist style letter if the harassment continued. Not dramatic, but clear. I would not fund Claire's defense. Any further pressure was unwelcome, and any attempt to misrepresent my intentions to advisors or institutions would be documented. So I froze my credit that afternoon. Some people hear that and think it sounds extreme. Those people did not grow up in families where desperation and entitlement blurred into improvisation. I was not accusing my parents of identity theft. I was acknowledging that when people have already treated your assets like a moral commons, you do not wait around to find out how creative they are willing to get. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my condo building. The front desk called first. "Your mother is here to see you." I almost laughed at the phrase, as if motherhood alone were a valid form of access. "No," I said. "She doesn't come up." There was a pause. Then the concierge, clearly uncomfortable, said, "She says it's a family emergency. Then it can remain downstairs." I went to the elevator anyway because I wanted the interaction on camera in the lobby, not because I owed her face-to-face contact. She was standing by the holiday arrangement in a camel coat and cream gloves, holding herself like a wronged woman outside a courthouse. When she saw me, her eyes filled instantly. My mother could cry with the speed of a stage effect. "Nathan, thank God." I stayed several feet away. "What are you doing here? We need to talk privately." "No, you need me alone." "Different thing." Her face hardened for a fraction of a second, then softened again. "You are making this so much uglier than it has to be." "That's rich." She lowered her voice. "Claire is falling apart. She can't sleep. She thinks you hate her." "I don't think about her enough to hate her." That one hit. She flinched. "Listen to me," she said. "We were all upset that night. Maybe we approached it badly. But the point remains. She is your sister. If this attorney isn't retained, she could take a plea out of fear and ruin her future. We are not asking you to throw money away. This is an investment in your sister's life." Investment. Even now, she could not help using the language of my utility. "My answer is no." She stepped closer. "Then loan it." "No." "With paperwork." "No. You don't even need all of it. We can structure something. Your father has ideas." I almost smiled. Of course he did. "Mom," I said, "I need you to hear this once. Not only am I not funding Claire's defense, I am done discussing my grandmother's trust with you forever." Her tears vanished. "So this is about that?" "Yes. She turned you against your own family from beyond the grave." I felt something inside me go quiet. "No," I said. "She just saw you clearly before I did." The silence between us sharpened. The concierge pretended to study his monitor. Then my mother tried one last tool. She dropped the wounded elegance and let contempt show through. "You have always loved being the good one," she said. "That's why you're doing this. You would rather watch your sister drown than risk losing the only thing that makes you feel special." There are accusations so revealing they answer themselves. I looked at her and realized there was nothing left to salvage. Not because she wanted money, because she had finally said the quiet part aloud. My pain, my caution, my decades of being used, all of it had been reduced in her mind to vanity. She genuinely believed that saying no to exploitation was a narcissistic performance. "Go home," I said. She stared. "Excuse me." "Go home. Do not come here again. Do not contact my advisor. Do not contact me about Claire's case. If you continue, future communication will go through counsel." For the first time in my life, I watched my mother understand that she had lost control of the script. She left without another word. I thought that would end it. Instead, it enraged my father. He called that night from a blocked number, which was almost funny in its own way, because people who consider themselves dignified always become absurd when access is denied. "You threatened your mother with lawyers," he said the second I answered. I set a boundary. "You embarrassed her in public. She came to my building to pressure me. She came as your mother." "No." She came as Claire's collector. The silence that followed was so cold I could hear my own pulse. Then he said, "You are not behaving like a son." That used to be one of my deepest fears. Failing some invisible exam in filial duty. Disappointing the role I had been assigned before I was old enough to resist it. But by then something had changed. I was tired. Not dramatic movie tired. Bone tired. Tired of explaining obvious things to people committed to misunderstanding them. Tired of watching a family translate theft into need and need into right. Tired of pretending their version of love was complicated when it was actually very simple. They loved access. They loved leverage. They loved the child who made chaos feel flattering and the child who made chaos affordable. Maybe that was what adulthood really was in families like mine. Not wisdom, not forgiveness. Just the slow, ugly acceptance that some people do not want relationship. They want usable proximity. "I'm done with this," I said. "If Claire goes to prison, remember this moment. If Claire faces consequences, remember the night she drove drunk." He swore at me then. First time in years. A hard, ugly burst that somehow made him sound younger, not older, like the father from my teenage years who slammed doors and then claimed 5 minutes later that everyone else was too sensitive. I hung up. The letter from my attorney went out the next morning. It was calm, brief, and devastating precisely because it contained no emotion. I would not be providing funds. Further attempts to pressure me were to cease. Any communication regarding my assets, trust arrangements, or private financial matters with third parties would be treated seriously and documented accordingly. That letter did what my feelings never could. It forced them into a world where words had consequences. The smear campaign tapered after that. Not completely, but enough. Aunt Rebecca sent one final martyr text about how legal threats destroy families. I blocked her. Claire sent a long email at 2 in the morning saying she knew she had made mistakes, but I was choosing punishment over healing. I did not respond. My mother posted a vague book paragraph about betrayal and prayer that several older relatives dutifully reacted to with heart emojis. Elena sent me a screenshot and the message, "She's losing the room. People know this is insane." Weeks passed. I learned through Elena, not because I asked, but because information in families leaks sideways, that Claire ended up with a less expensive attorney. My parents refinanced something. An uncle contributed. Claire was furious with me, then despondent, then furious again. Apparently, she told at least one person that I had let money turn me cold. That was fine. Let her have it. Villainy is sometimes the cheapest role available. What surprised me was the aftermath inside my own body. At first, I felt only adrenaline and anger. Then came grief. Not for the version of my family I actually had. For the one I had kept trying to prove I deserved. There is a particular sadness in realizing you were never being approached as a full person. Only as a function. The good son. The stable one. The one who could be counted on. Those sound like compliments until you understand they really mean the one whose humanity can be discounted because reliability itself has been mistaken for consent. I started therapy in February. That sounds neat when written in one sentence. In reality, it took several weeks of insomnia, clenched shoulders, and one humiliating moment in a grocery store parking lot where I had a minor panic episode because an unknown number called while I was loading bags into the trunk. My therapist, a practical woman with no tolerance for euphemism, said in our second session, "You were trained to associate boundaries with danger." That was it. Not all of it, but the engine. The Christmas ambush had felt so intense partly because my nervous system still carried the old blueprint. If I said no, I would lose the family. What therapy began teaching me, slowly, awkwardly, was the harder truth. I had never had the version of family I thought I was protecting by staying compliant. I had proximity. I had obligation. I had role security. Those are not the same thing as love. In March, I received a padded envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was the photocopy of Grandma Evelyn's trust letter. My copy, not the original, but one I recognized because of a tiny coffee stain in the corner from the day I first scanned it years earlier. There was no note. I still do not know who sent it. Elena denied it convincingly. Martin said not him. Part of me thinks my Aunt Rebecca found it in some pile during one of my mother's grievance sessions and mailed it anonymously out of half guilt, half curiosity. Another part thinks maybe Claire did it in a moment of spite, to remind me exactly what I was clinging to. It did not matter. I sat at my kitchen table and read it again. Nathan, if you are reading this because someone is telling you that love requires access to what I left you, please understand that they are proving why I arranged things as I did. Help where help is earned. Be generous where there is honesty. But do not finance disrespect. I laughed so hard I almost cried. Not because it was funny, because the woman had known. She had known them, known me, known the shape the future would likely take, and she had still tried to hand me one clean instrument for self-protection. I framed a copy after that. Not in the living room. I am not theatrical enough for that. In my office, beside a bookshelf, where I could see it during the workday when life got noisy and old guilt tried to sound wise. The actual final break happened in June. Claire took a plea. Lesser than the worst-case scenario, worse than my mother had spent months insisting was possible. There was probation, fines, mandatory treatment, civil settlement negotiations still pending. I heard all of this through the family grapevine because by then I had cut direct contact with my parents entirely. Then my father emailed me. Subject line, family funeral. For one terrifying second, I thought someone had died. The body of the email was one sentence. If you plan to attend your mother's sister's funeral on Saturday, do not create a scene. I stared at it for a full minute before something between rage and laughter came over me. They could not help themselves. Even death had become another venue for preemptive blame. I had not contacted them in months. I had not threatened a public confrontation. Yet there it was again, the old script waiting for me before I even arrived. Behave, do not embarrass us, contain yourself, absorb the distortion. I did not go to the funeral. I sent flowers. I called Elena afterward. I blocked my father's email. That was the moment no contact became real, not just tactical. People who have never done it think no contact is one dramatic decision. Usually it is a staircase built from smaller recognitions. This is not safe. This is not honest. This is not changing. Until one day you look back and realize the relationship has already ended in everything but paperwork. A year later, my life was quieter. Not better in some cinematic all-sunlight way. Just quieter. I slept more. I stopped checking unknown numbers with a spike of dread. I spent money on things that would once have triggered guilt, like replacing my sofa and taking a week in Maine by myself in October. I dated someone briefly, badly, then healed from that like a normal person instead of a haunted one. I kept going to therapy. I laughed more with friends who knew the whole story and did not make me soften it to sound respectable. Sometimes relatives still leak updates. Claire is trying. My mother tells people she doesn't understand why I cut them off over one disagreement. My father has reduced the whole thing to financial misunderstandings, which is such a bloodless phrase, it almost deserves admiration. But here is the part that matters. On paper, what happened that Christmas was a fight about money. That is how families like mine prefer to frame these things, because money sounds vulgar and specific and therefore containable. It makes the conflict seem negotiable, as if the number had just been smaller, or the payment structured differently, or the holiday timing less clumsy. Maybe we all could have remained a family. That is not what it was. It was a loyalty test designed around self-erasure. They were not asking for funds in a vacuum. They were asking me to confirm the central lie of my role in that family, that my responsibility existed to subsidize everyone else's irresponsibility. That being the stable one meant I should expect to be harvested in emergencies. That good children are those who surrender enough of themselves to keep the system comfortable. The money was just the altar. The real sacrifice was supposed to be me. And maybe that is why I do not regret saying no. I regret that there was ever a world in which I had to. I regret the years I spent trying to earn basic respect from people who only trusted me when I was useful. I regret every Christmas I sat through, every soft-voiced manipulation I translated into concern because I was not ready to call it what it was. I regret that the injured stranger in the other car became a background prop in my family's panic rather than the obvious center of the moral equation. But I do not regret protecting the one thing my grandmother tried to place outside their reach. I did not empty the trust. I did not pay Claire's lawyer. And when my parents insisted that blood should outweigh boundaries, I finally understood something that should have been obvious much earlier. Blood ties can explain a relationship. They do not excuse access, especially not to the life you had to build in spite of them.